So it's effectively like a power board that you plug into the car. You're also getting the standard kit that you would not expect to get at this price point. Now, once upon a time, it was only the BYD Shark as the plug-in hybrid offering of utes in the Australian market. And it's been making hay in that last few months as well with loads of sales. But now there is competition, and it's the GWM Cannon Alpha PHEV. Now, these are two plug-in hybrid utes. They've got a slightly different mechanical layout underneath, but pricing and spec are very similar. And in this video, we're gonna find out which one is best. And we're gonna go around town, we're gonna go on the highway, we're gonna go off-road, we're gonna do load testing, and we're gonna do some towing as well. We're gonna put these things through their paces properly and see which one is best. The BYD Shark 6 is Australia's first plug-in hybrid ute, and it's priced from $57,900 plus on-road costs, and it only comes in one trim level. The Shark 6 has a 1.5 litre turbocharged petrol engine up front, which makes 135 kilowatts and 260 newton meters. This can power a 29 kilowatt hour battery through a generator or turn the front wheels directly at higher speeds. There are two electric motors in the Shark 6. There's a 170 kilowatt and 310 newton meter unit up front, and a 150 kilowatt 340 newton meter rear unit. Now, this gives a combined output of 321 kilowatts and 650 newton meters. Suspension is also different to the Cannon Alpha. We've got independent suspension all round in the Shark 6. The GWM Cannon Alpha plug-in hybrid is priced from $59,990 plus on-road costs for the Lux spec, while the better equipped Ultra spec goes for $66,990 plus on-road costs. However, it's worth noting that there are some ABN holder offers there, which are drive-away prices, and that increases the value of this vehicle. Check the website for all the details. Under the bonnet of this hybrid ute is a 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine, which makes 180 kilowatts and 380 newton meters. Now, this runs through a 9-speed automatic transmission, which has an integrated single electric motor with 120 kilowatts and 400 newton meters. Combined outputs for this Cannon Alpha PHEV are 300 kilowatts and 750 newton meters, and both the petrol and electric motors can power either the rear or all four wheels. This all runs through a locking low-range transfer case along with front and rear differentials, and this Ultra spec gets locking diffs front and rear. The Cannon Alpha has independent front suspension along with a coil-sprung rear end with a live axle and panhard rod. The Shark 6 doesn't have any low-range transfer case or locking differentials, which could prove a problem off-road, and we're going to find out about that later. Suspension is also different to the Cannon Alpha. We've got independent suspension all round in the Shark 6. One of the main benefits of a plug-in hybrid ute is the fact that it can drive with petrol power, hybrid power, or as a full EV with no fuel burnt whatsoever. The electric-only driving range of the BYD ute is a claimed 80 kilometers, and that is something that we were able to match during our testing. The overall driving range is 800 kilometers, and our fuel economy with a low battery was around 8.5 litres per 100 Ks. The Cannon Alpha's battery is the biggest, with 37.1 kilowatt hours of capacity, and that gives a claimed electric-only range of 115 kilometers and a 1,060 kilometer overall driving range. Although our testing saw a real-world EV driving range closer to 100 kilometers, and fuel economy with a low battery was around 10.5 litres per 100 Ks, so it's not as frugal as the Shark. The BYD Shark can do 7 kilowatt AC charging and 55 kilowatt DC charging, which gives the ability to go from 25% to 100% in around 25 minutes. The Cannon Alpha can do 6.5 kilowatts of AC charging and a 50 kilowatt DC charging speed, which means you can do a full charge on this ute in around 40 minutes. Sorry, that was an overload of numbers, but they are all very important in terms of choosing which one of these might be a better fit for you and your usages. But there is one other element beyond the numbers which I think is even more important, and that is the mechanical layout between the two. Let me explain the differences. Now, that petrol engine in this Shark, obviously it can generate power to charge up the battery and give you a hybrid driving experience, but it cannot power the rear wheels in this vehicle. It can only power the front wheels, in fact. There's no mechanical connection between the front and the rear wheels in this Shark, only two electric motors and a whole bunch of wiring. With the Cannon Alpha plug-in hybrid, it is a different story. We've got a petrol engine here which runs through a more traditional powertrain, you could say. There's an electric motor actually wedged in between the engine and the gearbox around the torque converter area, and that runs through a 9-speed automatic transmission, hybrid of course, which then powers all 4 wheels through what you would probably call a more traditional 4-wheel drive powertrain. Now, because you haven't got a big gearbox and transfer case after the engine in this Shark, there's room to fit the battery actually in between the wheels here. So it's pretty much under the driver's and the passenger's seat here, mounted there. It's a pretty good location for it, to be honest with you. It's low and central. But with the Cannon Alpha plug-in hybrid, there's too many oily mechanically bits wedged in here. So for the batteries, they've actually moved to the rear of the vehicle. They're sitting around this area here, actually over towards the back as well. There's 2 different battery packs because GWM really wanted to fit as much battery capacity as they possibly could in this vehicle. Now, as you can see, there's no room for an actual spare wheel in that traditional spot underneath. And in other markets around the world, they just have a tyre repair kit, which obviously didn't cut it in Australia. So GWM Australia did a local fix for that and fitted it in the tub. No, it's probably not the most elegant way of fixing the problem, but I'll tell you what it's better than, not having a spare at all. If you're enjoying this content, please give us a quick thumbs up on the video. It would be really appreciated after the hundreds of kilometers of testing we have put on these 2 vehicles to put this comparison together. Payload is a crucial element for any kind of ute, and in this point the Shark 6 has the advantage over the GWM Cannon Alpha. We've got 790 kilos of payload available with the BYD, which beats the 685 kilos available with the GWM. So the Shark does have the advantage of payload, and in terms of the tub overall, it does offer, I think, a little bit more of a traditional experience overall. The strangest thing about it would probably just be this button here. 2 presses to open the tailgate. Down it comes, but there's no real surprises in here. You've got 4 tie down points. Actually, you've got 6 tie down points in total. You've got a button here for some lights on the side. That works well. And then, of course, this is a plug-in hybrid, so you've got a lot of auxiliary power you can dip into, and that is all done via a panel of 3 outlets over here on the side. They're over here, pretty well protected from the weather, and you've got 3 10-amp power outlets there ready to go. Now, at the business end of the Cannon Alpha plug-in hybrid, things are a little bit different. Now, the first thing I want to point out is the tow bar here. It's probably not as neatly installed as what you had in the Shark in terms of clearance, but that's probably for good reason, because you've got a lot of battery under here, and that will actually act as a bit of a skid plate when you're off-road. So the departure angle probably isn't as good, but you do at least have some protection there. Now, the next thing to talk about is this tailgate. The same as non-plug-in hybrid variants, you've got this pretty trick tailgate where press this once, it actually opens like a little set of barn doors, which is pretty interesting. And then close it up again, give it a long press. There we go. Down it goes. That is damped as well, and this is your storage space in the back here. Now, I've noticed you do have a little bit of a raised lip area here. Once again, that's a reminder of all the battery power that is living underneath the tub here. You can fit a tray if you want, however. It'll just have to be around that height, I suppose, at a minimum. But otherwise, you do have one thing missing here. That is power outlets in the tub. That isn't afforded by GWM in terms of having a setup here. Instead, you actually got to come around to the side here. It's not included in the vehicle, it's actually an accessory, so you'll have to fork out a bit extra for it, but this is the vehicle to load setup here. So you plug this in, the car can't be driven anymore at the moment while this is set up like this. So it's effectively like a power board that you plug into the car. You've got 3 10-amp power outlets here. They're surge protected for whatever it might be. And that is similar to what you get in the Shark. There's 3 over there as well, but we're not also counting the additional 4th outlet, which is in the interior of the Shark, which is a bit of extra flexibility. And if you're interested in the Ford Ranger plug-in hybrid, make sure you are subscribed to Drive.com.au, because we're going to be behind the wheel of that 3rd plug-in hybrid ute very, very soon, and you don't want to miss it. Now, one of the big things about this BYD Shark 6 is the amount of car that you're getting for your money. This is a big ute after all, and the price is relatively very low. But on top of that, you're also getting a hell of a lot of bells and whistles, standard kit that you would not expect to get at this price point. Despite only having 1 trim level, the BYD Shark 6 is an impressively kitted out vehicle, especially for the asking price. On the inside, you've got heated and ventilated front seats with electric adjustment and fake leather trimming. There's also a 10.25-inch digital instrument cluster, heads-up display, 360-degree camera system, and a 12-speaker sound system. The 15.6-inch infotainment display is huge, and it's got wireless and wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, as well as digital radio, native navigation, and remote controls through a BYD companion app. Now, sometimes you might be really wowed by that big shopping list of standard kit that you get in a car that is relatively cheap. And, well, sometimes it can be a little bit too good to be true. The build quality can be low. Those bells and whistles, well, you know, the bell doesn't ring and the whistle doesn't whistle sometimes, if you know what I mean. But in this case, the build quality of the Shark actually feels really solid. When you start to shift things around here, this thing feels really, really well built. Obviously, it's not real leather. This is all fake leather and that sort of thing, but the seats are comfortable. You've got decent materials around the place, a fair bit of soft touch as well. I really do like that storage nook in front of the passenger here. It's actually quite deep. You could fit a lot of stuff in there, and you've got some good storage here at the same time as well. There's a wireless charging pad with air vents there. You can just fit your wallet and your phone and your keys there quite easily. The glove box is big. That's where your power outlets are, and then you've got two cup holders here. Now, there are some physical buttons that helps with the everyday usage of the car. I think parking sensors, going between hybrid and electric mode. That's your start stop as well, not start stop in the sense of at the traffic lights, that's turn the car on and turn the car off. But you've got some physical controls there, and then you've got the infotainment. Yes, it's big. Yes, it's got some tricks like flipping around and that sort of thing, but the operating system is pretty good actually. I don't mind it. And one feature which I do really look forward to trying out, maybe in absolute solitude later, is karaoke. I'll check that out later, but definitely I will not be recording that and I will not be broadcasting it whatsoever. Now, there are two specs to choose from in the plug-in hybrid Cannon Alpha range, but if you want all the bells and whistles, then Ultra is the pick. The GWM Cannon Alpha plug-in hybrid Ultra does have a few extra tricks up its sleeve, which helps with the price disparity between these two utes. Along with having heated and ventilated front seats, this GWM also gets massaging front seats, as well as heating and ventilation in the second row. Infotainment is slightly smaller at 14.6 inches, but it does have the same range of features like wired and wireless Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, native navigation, digital radio, and a companion app functionality. And what is the interior like? Well, it's definitely different to the Shark 6, but this isn't a completely new thing. So if you've been in another Cannon Alpha before, or even a GWM Tank 500, you would find a lot of similarities on the inside of this car. Now, we do have a fairly traditional layout of things, I suppose. We've got this sort of metallic looking plastics here, a lot of the piano black, and then this wood finish here, which I don't think it's fooling anyone that it's definitely not wood on the front there. Maybe it doesn't look as premium in some respects, I suppose, but let's talk about practicalities. Now, we'll slide this forward here. You do have a wireless charging pad there. You kind of think that maybe there was a bigger storage space there, but there's just a spot for your phone. Now, you can run your charging cables through a little hole here to your power outlets. Now, that's not a huge storage space underneath. It's worth pointing out. Some vehicles do have that, but you've just got a smaller little nook down here where your power outlets are. Now, there's cup holders here. They're a little bit deep and buried in, I suppose, and then a center console, which is quite big. You've got this sliding little bit on top here, which is handy, I suppose. And then the center console, it's big enough, I think. You've got a little slot there for air to come in if you want to pump some cold air into it. So this interior, I think it works well overall. It's definitely comfortable. We've got tilt and reach through the steering column. Not a huge amount, I should say, by the way, but I think it's comfortable enough for most usages. And I think the treatment of the interior, I suppose, this might suit some people a little bit more. We've got a big infotainment display here, which is similar to the BYD, but I think just the fit and finish, although it is quality here, just goes in a slightly different direction. Now, it's the second row of the Shark 6 where you still get the sense of space and the benefit, I think, of the size of this vehicle overall. Now, as usual, that's my driving position up front there. I will note, however, talking about this seat in front, that it is a fairly bulky seat. It's got these wings here. It's got a big old headrest as well. So my forward visibility perhaps isn't as good as it could be elsewhere, but in terms of space, it is great. I'm around 1.8 meters tall, a little bit under 6 foot in the old money, and As you can see here, in terms of leg room and tow room, this is pretty good for a four-wheel drive ute, I should say. Some of them can feel a little bit tight in that regard, but this does feel good. Now I've got air vents here for the back. I've got a little storage nook that's pretty small and not terribly useful, 2 USB points, and of course a household plug, because don't forget, this has vehicle to load and a big battery. So you've actually got a lot of resource there in terms of electricity to dip into if you want it. Now, one thing I do like about this Shark 6 is just the fact that the space allows this to be usable for families. Even a rearward-facing baby seat, for example, can fit in, but just having comfortable adults in the back isn't normally what you would expect from a four-wheel drive ute, but this Shark, it does really well in that regard. Now, the level of features doesn't really slow down in the second row of this Cannon Alpha plug-in hybrid, which is pretty cool. We've got things like air vents and power outlets, of course, but we've also got heated and vented seats in this second row. Plus, check this out, electric adjustment. So you can move this seat forward, it tilts the backrest a fair bit, and because I've got a good amount of space on offer here, this is an impressively comfortable second row, I have to say. Pop down this, we've got a wireless charging pad here, bit of extra storage, even some pop-out cup holders there. For a four-wheel drive ute, this is impressively comfortable, I have to say, but also just in terms of space. Let me get out of business class mode here and just sit back up again. This is my seating position up front. I'm around 6 foot tall, 1.8 meters, somewhere around that money. And as you can see here, I've got loads of leg room in front of me here, much over around 2 fists actually, I suppose, and plenty of headroom as well, even though we do have a sunroof fitted in this model. So in terms of fitting people in here, bigger adults, kids in baby seats and that sort of thing, this vehicle is really well set up, plus you get a handful of luxuries. The best way to sum up the Shark 6 driving experience is that this feels like an electric ute with petrol assistance that chimes in from time to time. This brings an unheralded level of smooth torque and drivetrain refinement compared to a diesel-powered ute, and this thing is fast as well. It can cover the 0 to 100 km/h dash in less than 6 seconds. But despite the use of independent suspension all round, this Shark does still exhibit a bit of a busy and sometimes jostling ride quality over rough and broken surfaces. This is something typical of the segment, but it's an area where the Cannon Alpha in comparison has a clear advantage. And you can never really escape the weight of this Shark either when you're driving it around town. It is by its nature significantly heavier than what you get with a regular diesel-powered ute. When loaded up with weight, the Shark did handle things quite well through the suspension and the steering, and of course you've got plenty of grunt available through that electric heavy driveline. And while this is a big and heavy vehicle, the Shark does tend to handle quite well through corners. Ford-driven wheels gives it a good sense of stability, and the Continental tyres no doubt help with on-road grip. But the Shark is at its least appealing when you're at a low battery level, which the vehicle doesn't really allow to drop down below 25% if it can do anything about it. In this case, you've still got plenty of grunt available, but that engine really wakes up and starts working hard to replenish the battery levels as quickly as possible. It's definitely not refined, and that engine does feel quite thrashy at times. In comparison, the Cannon Alpha plug-in hybrid feels more like a petrol-powered ute with electric assistance through that single integrated electric motor. The petrol engine feels torquey and flexible, and then you've got that nice element of electric assistance chiming in quite seamlessly. Switching between the driving modes from electric to hybrid and into petrol can bring an occasional clunk through the driveline, but the driving experience is mostly a typical internal combustion one, the engine revving up and down as it runs its way through the gears. Coil-sprung rear end with a panhard rod setup that is actually borrowed from the Tank 500 offers an impressive level of ride quality, smoothing out rough surfaces much better than the Shark in comparison. And it makes the Cannon Alpha particularly comfortable around town and easy to drive with good levels of overall refinement. The driveline is smart enough to switch between rear wheel and all-wheel drive automatically, giving a sure-footed feeling on most surfaces. And even when you mash on that throttle, there is plenty of acceleration on offer. No, it's not as outright responsive as the Shark, as you do have to wait for that petrol engine and transmission to start delivering torque, but for a ute, this is still quite rapid. When the battery level drops down to its lowest point with no more EV range indicated, the driving experience of this Cannon Alpha doesn't dramatically change. Of course, you've got less electric assistance on offer there, but the car does manage things pretty well. And it drives in a similar way to a closed-loop hybrid without the bigger plug-in battery. although it's certainly not as efficient as the Shark 6 in direct comparison. Off-road performance between these two utes couldn't be more different when we put them to the test on the exact same hill climb challenge. On one hand, the GWM Cannon Alpha plug-in hybrid was a good off-road performer in this test. With low range engaged and a bit of rain to contend with, the GWM was able to take on and finish the challenge without any real issue. The off-road traction control system is impressive here in how it performs, but of course having locking differentials front, rear and centre is a great thing to have off-road. The Cannon Alpha felt stable and the driveline was easy to manage through the throttle for nice, easy and controllable progress. On the other hand, the BYD Shark was nothing really but a real disappointment off-road. Now, it didn't matter what driving mode I had engaged or how long I had that accelerator pedal mashed to the floor. The Shark simply wasn't able to muster up enough torque or momentum to finish this challenge, no matter how hard I tried. In fact, at one stage there, it started going backwards when I was trying to go forwards. And to make matters worse, it warned against trusting the park brake on the hill, saying there was a risk of a slide if I got out. The Shark is well below the expected levels of off-road capability in terms of looking at four-wheel drive utes, and you've got to look at this vehicle as more of a soft roader than a real off-roader. The GWM Cannon Alpha has a clear advantage out of these two with a 3.5 tonne braked towing capacity, which beats the Shark's 2.5 tonne limit. However, a lower payload here means those who do want to tow heavier amounts won't be able to use that little amount of payload left over for much else. Although, there is a 6,745 gross combination mass in this GWM, which is a decent figure for real-world usage. In comparison, the lower towing capacity of the Shark is offset somewhat by a larger payload at 790 kilograms. The gross combination mass is around 1 tonne lower than the GWM at 5,750 kilos, so that means even when you are towing at the maximum amount of this Shark 6, owners will need to be sure not to exceed that leftover available GCM with other weight. And a quick note, apologies for the drop in audio quality in this upcoming part of the video. We were having a couple of technical issues at the time.
Now, I've got to say I didn't have high hopes for this Shark 6 in terms of the towing performance overall. After all, if you do use up all of that battery power you've got here available, you're left with effectively a front-wheel drive, 1.5 litre turbocharged, petrol, big rig, and that doesn't really sound very good for towing. Excuse me, I'm talking to you on the camera here, and the driver monitoring system is being a little bit unhappy with that. But anyway, let me run you through my experiences so far. So what I've done effectively is try to mimic that great Australian family holiday up the coast. So I've got a 1.9 tonne caravan on the back there. It's actually a hybrid pop-top camper from Cub Campers. So it doesn't have the same sort of aerodynamic penalty, I suppose, than what you would get elsewhere. Now, I've got B-doubles getting around me here because I'm going slow, driving safely. But normally what I've been doing is sticking to the speed limit during my testing. Now, that camper, it's not the full 2.5 tonnes, but what I've done to compensate for that actually is load this vehicle up fairly heavily. Now, I'm not far off the gross combination mass allowable for this vehicle, and I'm just a smidgen off the rear axle load capacity as well, so I can't really go much harder than what I've got here. Although, I suppose in some certain conditions, if it was a hotter day, if I had a larger caravan with more aerodynamic drag behind me, that would be a different story. But anyway, how's it been? Actually, not too bad. This towing mode that the vehicle automatically goes into when you hitch up a trailer, what it does is it tries to boost that battery power all the way up to 70%, regardless of whatever driving you're doing. It's not a bad thing either, because when you get to a hill like what I'm on at the moment, you start drawing into that battery. And if this hill went for 10 or 15 kilometers, then there could be trouble. But generally speaking, these big hills on the highways heading north out of Sydney, they're around 2 or 3 kilometers long, something like that. That petrol engine is working really hard to try and do as much of the heavy lifting as possible. And so while that battery power does deplete a little bit, I'm seeing it drop down from 70 to 68 at the moment, 67. I've seen it gone down to about 64% after a big long climb.
but there is enough smarts here now for the Shark to recognize that, and when you get to the top of the hill and you start coasting along or you start going downhill, it starts to replenish that battery as quickly as possible. So it is pretty smart in that regard. But one of the biggest things, the biggest problems with this vehicle, I think, is fuel consumption. So we're averaging around 17.5, 18 litres per 100 while towing this caravan, which, like I said before, could be more stressful for the vehicle. This is nicely aerodynamic. It's not that heavy either, so things could certainly be worse in that regard, but fuel consumption really does shoot through the roof. It's almost double what you would expect unladen, for that matter. But otherwise, performance, it's good enough, I think. Suspension performs well enough. It starts to get a bit soft and cushy around the place. Steering's not too bad, and throttle response does get fairly soft. It gets a bit unresponsive, unwilling, I suppose, to accelerate at times. So you really got to put the pedal down sometimes. The performance is there, but it's like it almost doesn't want to do it in a way. So, you know what? It's good enough. It's definitely not excellent, and I don't know if I would trust it on a really, really hot day going up a massively long, steep hill somewhere. But for this kind of driving, which I think is where the Shark needs to perform well enough, it's a pass. So we've unloaded everything out of the Shark and we've put it into the Cannon. So all of that stuff in the tub and also the trailer as well. So this is a like for like comparison. And the first thing that you'll notice when you drive this Cannon is that I suppose it feels a little bit more like a petrol powered ute with electric assistance, where the Shark in comparison, it feels like an electric ute with petrol assistance. So you've got a petrol engine that really flares up at times and revs sort of like a power generator, where this is shifting through the gears. It's revving in a more conventional manner, I suppose you could say. Performance does seem to be pretty good in this Cannon overall. I'll caveat that with a note that at the start of this towing test, the battery was at a relatively low level. Now that was the same case with the Shark as well, but because that petrol engine is in a different configuration there, the Shark is actually very good at putting power back into the battery as quickly as possible. This Cannon can't do it as quickly. But that being said, even though I've started this test with about 8 kilometers of electric only range, that petrol engine hasn't turned off, and now I'm up to about 20 kilometers. So it is harvesting power back, and that petrol engine is putting power back into the battery. Even with a relatively low state of battery charge, this Cannon Alpha is towing the loads quite well. Now this does have, of course, a 3.5 ton braked towing capacity, and we will be testing that out a bit more thoroughly in the future. But what I can see from this point of view is that this 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine does a pretty good job of dragging this amount of weight down the road and down the highway in particular. There is electric assistance there, but it's definitely more dominated by the petrol driving experience, I think. Although similar to the Shark, fuel consumption does shoot up quite hard in this Cannon Alpha plug-in hybrid. So you're looking at around 17.5, 18 litres per 100 Ks when it's all said and done. So once again, you're looking at around double what you would use normally if you were towing. But otherwise, performance is good. Suspension feels pretty good. Steering is perhaps a little bit light and vague, and you do get some steering assistance that is mostly unwanted through the safety systems here. That does get a little bit frustrating at times, but suspension feels good. We do have a different suspension setup in this ute, don't forget, but it handles the weight well. It drives nicely, and it does have a nice amount of smoothness in the ride quality, even when you're towing, which is good. I thought the old diesel-powered ute in the modern day was getting pulled in a lot of different directions by the Australian buyer, but these plug-in hybrids take things to a whole nother level. They've got to have payload, towing, they've got to go off-road, they've got to be comfortable, efficient. There's so many different things for the buyer to consider between these two. But there can only be one winner, as they say, and if I was putting my money down today, even though it is the most expensive option, I'd be taking this one home. I prefer the off-road capability that comes with this Cannon Alpha plug-in hybrid. And also you've got a beefier petrol engine and a more traditional four-wheel drive powertrain, which works better for off-road, but also for towing. But I've got to say, I can see why people would buy the Shark at the same time. The asking price is lower, you've got better straight line performance there, and you do have a slightly better payload. So this does have some advantages. But from the perspective of a traditional Australian ute buyer, the Cannon Alpha plug-in hybrid ticks more boxes overall. So even though it is more expensive, this is the one that I'm giving the win to. If you want to weigh up these two hybrid utes against some old-fashioned diesel power, then maybe consider the Isuzu D-Max Blade, which is a new variant which we tested hard off-road in our latest video, and is definitely worth checking out.